Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really massive investigation, one that uncovers the enormous economic scale and the frankly hidden human risks of the global beverage manufacturing industry. You know, we all enjoy our favorite drinks, but we rarely stop to consider the staggering physical toll the manufacturing process actually takes on the people who make them. So, we're going to break down some completely fascinating and sobering new research to see exactly what is happening on the factory floor, and more importantly, how we can better protect workers worldwide.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand the scale of the problem, we first have to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of the industry. The beverage sector is an absolute economic giant. Just to give you an idea, in the European Union alone, this sector contributes a staggering annual turnover of over 1.109 trillion euros. It's literally a colossal machine of production, employing over 4.57 million people just in that one region.
But you know that massive scale of production? It comes with a truly massive and often totally invisible human cost. According to some pretty staggering recent estimates from the International Labor Organization, 395 million workers worldwide sustain non-fatal occupational injuries every single year. That's an enormous portion of the global workforce getting hurt simply by showing up and doing their jobs.
And tragically, the danger doesn't just stop at non-fatal injuries. To firmly establish the gravity of this global workplace crisis, consider that 2.78 million occupational fatalities occur globally each year. The sheer human cost of industrial work, including food and drink manufacturing, is devastating. Plus, it actually contributes to an estimated economic loss of up to 6% of gross domestic product in some countries, all due to poor occupational health and safety practices.
Moving on to Section 1, Inside the Awash Factory, a historic case study.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the history. We have this massive global problem, right? But numbers in the millions can be kind of hard to truly connect with. So to humanize this data, we're zooming in on a specific historic facility. We're looking at a 2024 case study of the Awash Wine and Beverage Factory in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to see exactly how these risks play out on the ground. This isn't just any plant. Its winemaking tradition stretches back decades. It was established way back in 1936 by Greek and Italian families. It was nationalized in 1974, regrouped, and today operates as a privatized company and employs about 1,040 workers, and it's a beloved brand that's really interwoven into the cultural fabric there. But researchers wanted to look past the brand itself to examine the day-to-day safety of those 1,040 workers.
And here is the core finding of their 2024 assessment. Nearly 16%, actually 15.9% to be exact, of the factory's workers experienced a workplace injury in the 12 months prior to the study. Just think about that for a second. In a single year, roughly 1 in 6 workers sustained an injury while on the job.
Which brings us to Section 2, Anatomy of an Injury, where it happens.
That 15.9% represents real physical trauma. So let's physically ground this data for a second and investigate exactly how these injuries manifest on the human body during the winemaking process. It begs the question, when you're working with heavy machinery, bottling lines, sanitation chemicals, and massive vats of liquid, where do most factory injuries actually happen on the human body? Is it the back from heavy lifting, maybe the head from falling objects? Take a second to think about what the most vulnerable part of a worker might actually be.
Well, the data paints a very visceral picture. Fingers and hands absolutely take the brunt of the damage. A massive 55.8% of the reported injuries impact the worker's fingers, and 46.5% impact the hands. In a tactile environment like beverage manufacturing, where workers are constantly interacting with moving parts, pulling, pushing, and carrying loads, the absolute most crucial tools a worker has, their hands, are highly, highly vulnerable.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 3, Uncovering the Hidden Risks, the data behind the danger.
Because knowing where the injuries happen is only half the battle, right? To really grasp workplace safety, we need to find the root causes. The researchers used a statistical method called multivariable logistic regression to isolate exactly what factors drastically increase a worker's chances of getting hurt. First up is experience. The study contrasts the risk levels between newer workers and veterans, and man, the gap is massive. Workers with under 5 years of experience are nearly 6 times more likely to get hurt than their counterparts with 5 or more years on the job. Specifically, the data shows an adjusted odds ratio of 5.86. This really highlights how absolutely crucial those early years are. Veteran workers have clearly developed a much stronger intuition for safety precautions and hazard avoidance.
Then we have the physical environment itself, specifically the stark danger of verticality.
Simply stepping off the ground is an incredibly risky task in this factory. Workers operating at heights face an 8.69 adjusted odds ratio for injury compared to those staying at ground level. That is nearly a 9 times higher risk. When you add unstable surfaces, limited protective barriers, or even just a simple loss of balance to an environment that already involves heavy machinery, the probability of a devastating fall absolutely skyrockets.
But the absolute critical human element of safety management here is supervision. Lacking regular professional health and safety supervision increases injury risk by nearly 6 times, an adjusted odds ratio of 5.9. And look, supervision isn't just about breathing down people's necks. It's about having a trained professional right there to spot unsafe conditions, enforce safety standards, and flag potential hazards before they turn into a painful statistic.
Now for Section 4, the PPE paradox, knowing versus doing. This brings us to a seriously fascinating behavioral contradiction regarding personal protective equipment, or PPE. You might naturally assume that workers get injured because they simply don't know the safety rules. But that's actually not true. A vast majority, 72% of the surveyed workers, have an excellent, good knowledge about occupational safety and PPE practices. They know exactly what the gear is, when to use standard precautions, and how to protect themselves.
And this brilliantly illustrates the problem. If they know about the safety gear, why on earth aren't they using it? When asked for the reasons they bypass standard precautions, exactly half of them, 50%, say they do it simply to save time. Only a tiny fraction cite a lack of access or lack of awareness. It is a very conscious choice, prioritizing speed over their own physical safety.
And that brings us directly to the consequence of that specific behavior. Skipping protective gear to save a few minutes roughly doubles a worker's chance of getting injured. The adjusted odds ratio here is 2.06. By just trying to be a little bit faster, they're making themselves over twice as vulnerable to those finger and hand traumas, the falling objects, and the mechanical injuries we talked about earlier. Finally, Section 5, Building Safer Workplaces, the essential takeaways. So how do we actually start reversing these global trends? Well, the Abash Factory findings act as a really powerful roadmap, not just for their own facility in Addis Ababa, but for global industrial safety as a whole. So the crucial point is this: supervision and basic protective equipment are the undeniable bedrock of workplace safety. You can honestly have the most advanced machinery in the world, but if you don't have experienced supervisors guiding those newer workers, and if you don't have a culture that prioritizes taking the time to put on gloves, hard hats, and boots, the injury rates are going to remain dangerously high.
The researchers lay it out as a super clear mandate in their conclusion. They say, strengthening safety training, improving PPE utilization, enhancing workplace conditions, and ensuring regular supervision are essential to reduce injuries. Protecting workers is ultimately about bridging that gap between simply knowing the rules, like that 72% did, and actively enforcing and practicing them every single shift. It requires completely changing the mindset that safety is just something that slows you down.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. Because honestly, this isn't just about a beverage factory in Ethiopia. It's about human nature. We all rush. We all think, oh, it'll just take a second. So I want you to think about your own environment. What safety shortcuts are you or your colleagues taking right now just to save a little time? Because as the data clearly shows, that shortcut might cost a whole lot more than the time it saves. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.